Thank you. And I apologize to the audience for not being more multilingual. About all I can say is hola without offending anybody so much, but I will certainly do my best to talk about EVOKAT, what we do. We just had a good summary of what the application standards can do and the different components. And I'm hoping that maybe as we go through EVOKAT, we can kind of connect the dots on some of those things and how you work with that. So EVOKAT is a cataloging solution. It's an online software as a service solution. And we've been in this industry for approaching 20 years. I personally have been working technology solutions around the industry for 20 years as well. And we worked on a project at CarQuest actually that kind of was the creation of what is PIES XML today. So we've really been involved in these XML formats from the beginning. So again, I appreciate all of your time and interest, and encourage questions as we get to the end, and hope it's something that we can use to help you enter the industry and understand how things can come together. So the EVOKAT solution gives you a way to author all of your catalog against the standards that we just heard about, the VCdb and the PCdb and all of that. And one of the I think, biggest benefits of getting your catalog in line with the standards that were explained is to make sure that your information is very clear and concise, and you can identify conflicts and issues and things like that that were mentioned. So one of the things that we kind of hang our hat on within our solution is this catalog health screen, or the function of reviewing your catalog and helping you find some issues. And we're just walking through a generic demonstration account with some kind of made up information out there today. But we break down your records and we match them against that industry standard every month. So as there's a new version of the VCdb or PCdb or whatever released, we grade your catalog against that and tell you what's changed. The standards, as she mentioned, come out at the end of every month. And with those, they add new vehicles, but also sometimes they go back and make modifications to the records or clean up some records that maybe were not previously as clear as they could have been. So when they change that, you then need to know how that impacts your particular catalog. And that's the function of this screen here. So in this basic demonstration account, there's about 15,000 records. And then we've thrown in a lot of issues just so we have some things to talk about today. A properly managed catalog, and in most of the accounts that we could go through, if we looked at live data, all of these numbers will be zeros because they are getting in, they're owning their data, and that catalog ownership is a really important part of getting your brand out there and representing it well. So we break things down and identify two different types of invalid vehicle records. And as they release the standards, an invalid definition is a case where they may have dropped an ID entirely from the system, just rebranded something, like instead of a Dodge Ram, it's now a Ram as a make, or those kind of things. And then an invalid configuration is a case where you're still using valid IDs, but the combination of those is not the same. So we try to give you, she talked about the XML standard and the IDs that go along with that. And that can be a little tricky to kind of remember in your head that, base vehicle 1234 is a Honda Civic or something like that. So everything in our system is using the human readable version of all of those IDs. And so as we look at the invalid records out here, we can just pick on any one of these. We can come in this particular record. In this case, we're showing all of the different parts that have configurations for this particular Malibu. But this second record, has an invalid definition. We then give you a resolution process to fix that. And we will never imply that we know what your fitment should be, but we can tell you what the options are within the standard. And that's one of the many values of the standard, is you don't have one company using one term and another when you get everybody the same. So in this case, that particular engine for an LS submodel is not valid anymore. So we can come down and look at all the combinations of submodels and engines. And we find there's a similar record down here where they just modified the engine slightly, basically added a little bit more information to the engine definition with the CC value. So to resolve that, we just click on our little checkbox and save it and go on from there. All the other issues can be about the same, different attributes and that kind of a thing. Whereas a configuration issue is very similar, but it's just saying that these are valid. This is a valid submodel elsewhere in the system for some other vehicle, but it's just not valid for this particular Cadillac DTS. So again, you can make whatever research you need and make whatever decision you need going from there. But active catalog managers will keep all of these numbers down to a 0. And this is normally just a trickle of records as they make changes in the VCdb itself. The next two are self-inflicted wounds within your catalog, where you've created 2 parts with some kind of overlapping conflict. A direct conflict is a situation where you have 2 parts with the exact same vehicle definition. So in this case, both of these parts are mapped to a 2002 Acura RSX base and front position. There's a lot of ways you can differentiate it. It could be a product element like a color, but it might also be a submodel or other position that needs to be changed. So we identify those so you can clean them up. Getting those records to be clean helps with your speed to market, because your trading partners don't get all these issues and send it back to you saying you need to clean it up. It also helps with returns, because if you have the duplicate records out there, somebody may be prompted to buy both parts and then return whichever one is not correct. And then also just representing your brand well. When you have clear information, somebody's going to come in and say, yes, they know what they're talking about. I want that one, and go from there. Extended conflicts are a little bit more complicated, because the records are not mapped exactly the same. And in this case, again, we have 2 different parts. They're both defined for the same engine, but one has this additional cylinder head type. And so this extended conflict, getting back to the issues of having a conflict out there in your data, if a customer came in with this particular Acura and this engine, they wouldn't know, should I buy the one that specifies the single overhead cam or the one that implies that it fits everything? So we identify those, give you the opportunity to resolve them. And that goes a long way to making sure your brand is represented well in the industry. Same thing with part types and positions. Occasionally they'll make a change to a part type, and you just need to keep consistent with that. Generally kind of minor changes, like this last month, I believe it was a couple of things that had to do with like a halogen light bulb was just converted to some kind of a regular light bulb. So you just identify those and make those changes. But this is something that should be, in a well-managed catalog, 0s across the board. We do support within EVOKAT the full VCdb, the South American instances we were talking about, and all those things. And again, we revalidate that catalog against your data. Let's see, moving on from that. This, as a software as a service, I want to touch on the fact that data ownership is something that's really kind of important to us. And there are a number of companies out there that you can just outsource your catalog to, and they'll modify it and those kind of things, but they might also kind of sell it out the back door. So we really hang our hat on the idea of you maintaining ownership of that catalog. And as you're coming on board with the standard, because it is a software as a service solution, you could still have a catalog manager. You can have people giving you guidance on your catalog and your branding and all those things. And then, but you still have access to that data. So it is yours and you can do anything you want with it. So that's something that we really kind of try and hang our hat on. For users, we'll find that companies or teams that are a little bit more catalog focused will be working on these issues, because they know that is something they get graded on with their receivers. And then teams that are a little bit more sales and marketing focused will be on the PIES side. And we haven't talked about PIES yet, but there's other metrics available to make sure you have that kind of coverage out there. Getting into authoring applications, jumping to a random item here. We do support, again, the ACES standard. There's the ACES equipment standard as well. There's NAPA is another standard out there. And then eBay and some other things have custom standards as well, which we can kind of get into support too, but that won't be the focus of today. So for this particular item, we show all the applications that are currently mapped to it. And then we try to give you a very clean interface for authoring applications to this system. And there are ways to do bulk data loads if you have some other sources out there. But if I was wanting to create a record or an additional vehicle for this particular part, we give you a tool to search the VCdb basically and build out whatever configuration you happen to need. In some cases, you might need to map a submodel, sometimes other attributes, and you can just kind of go on from there. But as you do that, you'll see what the valid configurations are for the attributes that you chose up top. And you can also pick multiple records. You can have different configurations of these fields. As I go to a different type, I have a few less values down here. Again, we push consistency. And if you have a particular part type that generally only needs these fields, then seeing that whole list of attributes can sometimes lead to some inconsistency in the way you're mapping something. But we can pick multiple year ranges, other attributes, specify regions, and on down from there. And then I can pick whatever records I want to choose. I could even come back and pick something entirely different. I don't know what this vehicle is, but when I come back to my mapping card, I'll see all the vehicles that I had defined with whatever attributes I used to define them. And I can add some fitment notes, and it can get a little bit technical, I guess, in terms of what falls into a fitment note versus a vehicle attribute. But you might have something like includes a sunroof or bucket seats or something that's not a vehicle attribute. That's the kind of thing that would go in a note. Very often, maybe a production date or something like that. But if I agree with all of this fitment, I simply save those records, and that kind of is automatically added out to my catalog. I can go out and generate a new ACES file immediately with all that information in it if I wanted to. This does a quick validation to make sure that you didn't create any conflicts. That's why it's showing the green values there. We were just talking about the different regions and kind of fitment notes out there. And since we are in a multilingual situation, I just want to point out that we do allow you for your custom authored notes to put in multiple languages out here. The QDB, which is kind of the industry structure for qualifier notes, which are kind of industry standard notes. There is a Spanish conversion as well, but within the ACES standard, you can put in your own notes, and we do support the multiple languages, so you can support all of that out there. The standards as well, as we're talking about going through the mapping process and seeing all the vehicles out there, one of the important things that I see in partnering with somebody that has experience in the industry and how to use these standards is that you can use the data to not only make sure that you're communicating clearly, but that you're also using it to identify potential holes in your coverage. We usually do that through our report library, which gives you a lot of different reports, but you can look at your coverage summary against Mazda's. In this case, it's a particular part type as well. But you can use that standard to help you find additional coverage out there. There's nothing in the VCdb or in the standards to say that your part will fit this vehicle, but it does help you to know they've added maybe a 2021 vehicle that they didn't have before, or there's a gap in your coverage that is just kind of an accidental issue like that. And that's one of the really important things, I think, in partnering with somebody that knows technology, or at least having somebody on your team that can use that subscription to the VCdb to improve your coverage in that way. So it's not just about including clear information, it's about making sure that you have as much coverage as possible. The standards also give you some flexibility with how things work, right? So we have conversions within our reporting system to convert, in this case, I have an AWDA PIES, which is just an alternate version of a PIES XML file. So we can convert to that. I mentioned the eBay standard as well. There's a report that converts to the eBay standard. There's different versions of ACES XML. If you were to sell to Amazon, for example, they will only take a version 3, not a 3.2, or version 4, or any of the newer ones either. And then there's other things through the report library where you can look at your data, where you can see the forest for the trees. When you're working through your issues, when you're working through individual records, sometimes you can't see the patterns, and that's where the reports really come into play. So we use these things to give you that flexibility. And the way EVOKAT works is we think we've hit most of the primary targets that are out there. But if you have a trading partner with a unique requirement or you have an internal requirement, we can generally work the data in those standards back and forth in whatever format you eventually need. And then when you're defining a new report, you simply choose the output that you want. And then there's other filters to say, I only want to include my brake drums, for example, or brake drums and brake fluid, whatever the case may be. Generate a report that only shows my coverage for Acuras, that kind of a thing. So you can pull that information out as you need. And then once it's done, it comes up in the report library, where you can then download it and send it wherever you want. And that gets back to the data ownership question. When you generate a report, you have that information. You can do whatever you want to with it. We try not to put any governors in between your and your data. So you could run a new version of an ACES file every 5 minutes if you wanted to. That would be excessive, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't. But you could, because it's your data. And we want you to be able to have access to it. The other side of data is the catalog is the PIES information. So when you think of ACES and PIES, hopefully your trading partners will take both of those files because they're two sides of the same coin. And it's important to have those pictures be consistent, right? If you send them an ACES file that has 100 parts in it, but your PIES file only has 50 parts, there's obviously a gap there. So putting everything into a single PIM kind of system allows you to make sure that you're exporting consistent information and going from there. The PIES standard itself is a superset of fields, and there's actually very little information about what you have to put in there per trading partner. So within our system, we've kind of put up a little bit of a overview of what we suggest you put into a PIES file and whether you are meeting those expectations. But really, it's up to your internal team to decide what is appropriate based on your trading partner's numbers. So if I actually updated the star there, that's the current rating. But that is just internal, has nothing to do with the industry as a whole. As we get into the product information, the PIES standard, if you've read through the document, breaks product information down into several sections. So there's some kind of basic information, including your part number and things like that. EXPI elements include country of origin, warranty information, and then there's descriptions, packages, and on down. Getting into the specifics of any of these, we can see there's additional fields. And again, there's very little direction to saying that you have to put in a date or you have to put in any of these values. But there's certainly some best practices, and it's up to you to decide internally what those practices are, and then also leverage partners that can give you some guidance on that too. But once you have that defined, and actually on this particular example, we have we have two different brands. So in our system, if you have a private labeling situation that you need to support, you can, for that same item, create two different brand profiles. So when it goes out the door as one brand, it's called part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For the other brand, it's sold as part 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And then you can customize the data between those two as you need it. That's true for all of the fields, but that's something that we support. Not everybody needs it, but we do support it. The EXPI elements, again, you can get into a whole bunch of fields and decide for yourself what is important. As you go across the standards, there will be a couple of fields that eventually get deprecated, and we still support those because there will be trading partners that want an older 6.2 version of PIES instead of the latest and greatest or something. But all of that is out there. When we get into descriptions, there's language elements, just like we were looking at on the fitment notes for applications. You can create notes or create descriptions, English, Spanish, the different languages that are supported out there. And on all of these fields, we only support the values that are supported in that PIES standard. So when you see a drop-down list of countries or package types or something like that, that's all keeping you in alignment with that PIES standard. The other elements, we could continue to go through the details, but pretty straightforward. What is a package and all those kind of things. Interchanges can be very important. Linking your product number over to another one, and we do some things to make sure this is consistent. But product attributes is an area that I would focus on. And we talked about the PADB, or the PAD was talked about earlier, as a way to help you understand the product attributes that might go along with your product. And that's another way, again, to leverage the standard to make sure you're presenting your brand the best way possible. So in this case, I've just got a couple different attributes out here. And within our system, this material color happens to be flagged as a targeted attribute for this part type. So it's letting me know, hey, we don't have a value for material color. You need to go out and populate that, so I could pick it for my values and then save it that way. So again, consistency is important. Prices, assets can be any kind of a digital asset, could be a product image, can be a sales flyer, installation diagram, variety of things. And then with our industry, Advance has some unique requirements. We do some unique things for what we call our My Car Part site, which is a e-catalog that you can access online with the data. Excuse me. The other product information, I mentioned that there are some metrics to help you with that product data coverage out there. There's very little guidance in terms, again, the industry and what to populate, but we do try and give you some of that direction out there. So hopefully you can use some of these other coverage and health metrics to make sure that you're in alignment on the PIES information as well. Getting back into some other kind of functions that we have, if you are a receiver of information, so perhaps you're not actually authoring it, but you're pulling in information they're using to build your own catalog. Some of our bulk load tools can be updating a file from a supplier, and they get an XML file in from them, and you just load that directly into your system. You can convert an XML file to a human readable version so that you can actually make sense of it instead of trying to read all the IDs that are out there. And then we have catalog builders, which is a way to do a lot of bulk loads. They're all Excel templates. So if you're going in and making a pricing change or changing your marketing descriptions or something like that, it's very tedious to go in and make manual changes to 1,000 different products. So doing that in an Excel file certainly is a lot easier. And then we also have something to identify change files, which as you get into the standard, the ACES standard, most files that you're going to generate, or everything you generate out of EVOKAT, and most people want a full file. It's called a full file, is your entire catalog. But in the interest of kind of speeding up the exchange of information and cleaning things, some people want to receive instead a change file. And that would be a summary, really two separate files of what your adds are versus your deletes from whatever the previous file is that you send them. So we do have a process to generate those change files if that's something that you're being asked for. And there's some other tools out here. It's a whole lot of information to try and digest. I hope that going through some of these screens and seeing the different elements that go into a PIES file, or how you map applications and those kind of things, I hope that can kind of help put the picture together in terms of those standards and how they all work.